Hi, everyone. Welcome to Chopsticks Alley Talk. We have an exciting show prepared for you today. I have my lovely co-host with me, Esther Young, who's has been a returning guest, and now she's actually co-hosting with me today. Hi, Esther.
Hello, I'm leveling up with Chami here.
And we're excited because at the end of the show, she has a special song that she wrote just for the show. And also we have, And we have Tossie Alabastro, who is the puppet master. He is behind the scenes, making sure that we all look good. And if there are any mistakes or any mishaps, it is his fault. Just saying. So without further ado, we would like to introduce our guests. And we'll be talking to each one of them individually much more, but I would like to introduce to you artist, photographer, Mark Erickson. Welcome, Mark. And also our wonderful friend, Wanda Foust, all the way from Alabama.
And you pronounced it correctly.
Oh, good. And Mark is all the way from New York. So we love this new platform because we're able to involve different guests and invite them on no matter where they live. So we're really excited about that. And Esther, I think today is actually quite a special day. Can you tell us about Juneteenth?
Absolutely. Today, Friday the 19th, is Juneteenth. And I know that both of our guests today can offer a lot more updated information. But just to get us all on the same page, I'm going to read a little bit about today, which marks the 155th anniversary of the formal end of slavery across the United States. The Emancipation Proclamation took effect at the start of 1863, midway through the Civil War, changing the legal status for millions of Confederate slaves. Although they still needed to escape to Union-controlled territory. When the war did end in 1865, the news of the Confederate surrender was slow to spread, and as a result, Texas, which was a remote slave state, was the very last state to recognize emancipation in 1865. But in the wake of nationwide protests sparked by the death of George Floyd 3 weeks ago, the date has taken on added meaning with a number of companies making the day a paid holiday. We also have groups that have called for this day to be recognized as a federal holiday, and within New York and Virginia, there's already been proposition to make it a paid day off for state employees.
That's amazing. I love it because, I have to tell you, I didn't really know about this day. Now, I knew historically that there was a day when the slaves who didn't know that they were free, they were told, but I didn't know it was specifically that date today. So I think it's really important to share that. And you know what? With Chopsticks Alley Art, the intent of the show today, titled Interracial Black and Vietnamese Families, with our two guests, it's really to share their narratives, right? So it is for them to share their own experience. And of course, to share Mark's amazing photography, which tells this whole other aspect of life for our audience to really hear about. So I'd like to introduce Mark to everyone. Mark was born in Saigon in 1972. He evacuated as part of the Operation Babylift in April 1975. And that's where I think orphans were being taken out of Vietnam because of repercussions that Americans and Vietnamese were afraid would happen to children who are of mixed race. Mark was then adopted by an American family in Western New York. He went to Harvard and studied documentary photography with Chris Killip from the United Kingdom and David Goldblatt from South Africa. And he currently works and lives in New York City. He is the author of the Photobook that we're going to share with you, a clip of what the book looks like and all the images. The book is called Other Streets, Scenes from a Life in Vietnam Not Lived. So, Mark, maybe you can tell us a little bit about why you decided to create this book and tell us your story.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Chami, Esther, Wanda, for having me on the show. The book, came together over the past couple of years. I had obviously shot the film a long time ago in 1993, which was my first trip to Vietnam since having left when I was an orphan. And it's interesting that, I'm the same age as, people like Viet Thanh Nguyen and other people who were actually physically born in Vietnam, but left when they were so young they don't remember it. So I think for a lot of people in my generation, going to Vietnam to see it for yourself, particularly if you grew up in the United States, it's just a really, definitely was for me an important part of my, growing experience as a person, and definitely helping me to, better understand, my Vietnamese identity. Growing up in an all-white family and all-white community without exposure to, Vietnamese people, language, culture, food, wanting to see it for myself was really, really important, particularly, in the United States, whether, it's in the television or in the movies. Everything in the United States about Vietnam is about the Vietnam War. And obviously, it's much more than that. And so seeing it for myself, being amongst Vietnamese people, learning about their lives, about the culture, and seeing and trying to figure out for myself, like, what does that all mean for me and my identity? That was really, really important. So I didn't take all of the photographs with the purpose of creating a book. I don't think there really was a purpose at the time other than I love photography, and it was important for me to document my experience. But if anything, nothing really happened with that body of work for a good 20 years. And then, really, one thing that I've reflected on, as I've gotten to know other people too, I think for adoptees or, people who grow up in these environments where you might be a minority of one or a small minority, I think that there's kind of a couple different spots in your life where trying to figure out your identity becomes more important. One is in those like teenage college years. And then there's a second part when you form your own family and have children. And then there's like this third wave, which I wasn't expecting, which is kind of like the midlife phase. And I think when I got to that point and my children were then older, teenagers, and they were asking me more about who, where did I come from, then that the body of work that was created in the book really kind of came to the fore. And I said, I should really do something with that, for myself, for my children. And if it's good, share it with the world.
I love that story, especially about getting to the midlife crisis part, because I think I felt the same way when I got to that point. It was a matter of going back to source, is what we say. There's a beautiful phrase in Vietnamese that goes like this: "Nước chảy về nguồn," meaning water flows back to source. And that's, I think once you get to that age, suddenly you're really curious. Like, I want to know where I'm from and why it matters. And so I definitely can relate to that. Maybe Tassie can show us a video of your book so our audience can see your amazing photography. And as she prepares that, I'll just keep talking. That's so great. I love this video because it shows this aspect of Vietnam life in Vietnam that most people don't get to see. Have you been back since, Mark?
No, but I was actually supposed to go this summer, but obviously can't go now, um, because I've been in touch with some of my half siblings. So I want to go meet them in person. So
Oh, wow.
those plans have to be pushed off to 2021.
Wow, that's so amazing. I hope you're gonna film the journey and of course take photographs, but we need to see like you come back and tell us all about that experience. Also, one thing you shared with us in our conversation before the show is you actually found that you are not of mixed race. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I knew my mother was Vietnamese, or at least from the paperwork, although, the paperwork from those days is very iffy. So things like who your parents were and what your birth date was and all of that stuff. But when I did get back in touch with, my Vietnamese family, they did share with me, who my, birth father was, who was a Vietnamese person.
Mm.
So that was illuminating too, although I really don't know anything about him.
Yeah. And do you have a Vietnamese name?
Van Hom.
Vang Ho. And do you ever use it or go by it or anything?
No, not really. No.
And the reason is it because it's just not who you are? It's not, it doesn't resonate, or what's the reason?
I mean, it wasn't my name all growing up, and I didn't have Vietnamese friends, and it just it doesn't really mean that much to me. And part of it's complicated in that I was adopted when I was almost 3 years old, and it's I have kids, and most people's earliest memories aren't until much later than that. And so it's this asymmetric relationship where my Vietnamese family has memories of me as a baby, as a toddler, as a young child, but I have no memory of them.
Mm.
So that makes it complicated too, in addition to, the language barriers and the cultural barriers and all of those things.
One thing I notice about your photographs as compared to other photographs from, say, non-Vietnamese people who go back and document the life in Vietnam is I feel like I can see the trust in the people's eyes as you take their photos. There's a curiosity, certainly, but that curiosity is not over shadowing the, yeah, you're one of us, right? When you think about like those what do you call them, like people who go to different countries and take pictures, you see the person looking back, the subject looking back with these eyes that are really intense, but there's something like a mistrust or yeah, you're taking my photograph, I'm staring back at you, but there isn't this, you're my friend, you're taking my picture. Right? Is that, what do you think, Esther? Do you see that too, or is that just my imagination?
That was probably the first thing I picked up on, was the laughing, smiling faces, and it makes me curious about the interaction you had with these people before and after the photos were taken, because it really felt like you were in the scene rather than just documenting it.
Yeah. So, you mentioned two of, my photographic mentors, teachers, Chris Killip and David Goldblatt, who kind of come from a long line of, I would say, social documentarians. Chris Killip kind of made his fame of really documenting, the British people who were left behind from the Thatcher Revolution in the 70s and the 80s. And David Goldblatt largely documented what life was like under apartheid. He was Jewish. And so in the apartheid structure, there were whites, there were colored. So Jews were in the colored category. So you're kind of a second tier citizen. And then there are the blacks. And so as a colored, he had the ability, and he had friends, and he was in like the protest media where he was able to intersect with different parts of the society. But I would just say, so really what I learned from them and what I aspire to in my own work is having, I think, the intimacy that, Tranmy, you and Esther, both noticed in the photographer. There's no like telescopic lenses where you're hiding in the bushes, but if you look at the images, a lot of that's taken with a 28 or 35 millimeter lens. So it's even you're actually very, very close to your subjects, either within a few inches or a few feet of them. And so you as a photographer are very much part of the scene. I think part of what you're seeing there is, yes, there is an interaction. And even though my Vietnamese is terrible, and, there was enough language where, we could talk to each other. And, some of them, the image that I used in for the front cover of the badminton players, obviously they knew I was taking pictures of them as they were playing badminton, but at the end, before I left, they wanted to pose for a picture. So in the book, I include some of the contact sheets. So you see all of the images that I took of them playing, but the last two images are them actually posing for a photograph. So they wanted me to, do that for them.
That's so great.
So
yeah, I love it.
But I think I see a difference in my work versus Western photographers who go to Vietnam and photograph kind of like post-war Vietnam. And I do think, or I hope that part of the relationship or the non-tangible things come across in the work. I think the art at its finest communicates what can't be communicated in words. And I think those feelings hopefully get, communicated to the readers of the work as well.
That's wonderful. I love it. And I can't wait to see more of your photographs. And, we're at Chopsticks Alley Art, we're very lucky we'll be able to feature your work at Evergreen Valley College in San Jose in January of 2021. And it will be in an exhibit called Fragments, along with our other visual artists, Hadi Agi and photographer Duan Toy. So it's going to be really great. So now we would like to shift our show and introduce our second guest, and that's Wanda Foust. So Wanda was born in Tuy Hoa, Vietnam during the war by a Vietnamese mother and a Black American father who was in the Air Force. Wanda was then raised by her grandmother while her mom was working. And then her father actually went back to Vietnam from Thailand to bring her and her mother to the U.S. And they ended up in Alabama, to be exact. And that's where Wanda is a retired activist and an advocate always, right, for
That's
racism,
right.
for racism, domestic violence, environmental issues, and much more. She is responsible for many aspects of data collected to help lobby and for raises for healthcare and for better resources and education for and professionals. So I think you're amazing, and we can't wait to
Thank
talk
you.
with you.
I'm not as interesting as Mark, but I'll try.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't meet too many Black American Vietnamese women from Alabama. I'm just saying.
We are a little rare.
So Tasi's going to share with our audience at some point, photos of your family. But tell us about what is your experience, what's your experience like? Tell us whatever you want to share.
Well, I mean, you pretty much said it in my introduction that, I was born in Vietnam. We left in 1973 and spent a year in the Philippines. And then we came here. My dad was stationed in Alabama shortly after my parents split. So my mom was the one that mostly raised me, and we both had to, I guess, become acclimated to the culture here in Alabama, learn English together. But I mean, I had a pretty good childhood despite everything.
Yeah. Did
One
you
thing,
go ahead, Esther?
one thing that struck me after reading your piece on Chopsticks Alley's page is, whereas we learned in an earlier conversation with Mark that he didn't actually meet another Vietnamese person until he was 18, going to college. You grew up in Vietnam, and then after your father got you and brought you to the States, you were a military brat. And so you met a lot of different people, and I'm definitely curious how you think that might have opened up your view of the world in a different way than others.
Because I was a military brat, I was able to have friends from everywhere. I've had friends from England, Japan. I mean, you name it, I've had that friend. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I loved having friends of all different races, backgrounds. It was wonderful. We got to just hang out, learn about each other's culture and food, and nothing brings anybody together better than food to me.
I totally agree with that. In fact, so we also have a Chopsticks Alley Eats group. And when we share with them that we'll be talking about this topic today, we were like, don't you want to know what Wanda eats at home? You know?
Mostly Vietnamese food still.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
I was just like most, I guess, Vietnamese kids that, you know, came over, had to beg for McDonald's, and it was a treat. So yeah, still mostly Vietnamese food even now, though.
Yeah.
Even though I'm in the South.
Well, we want to do a shout out to our Twitch audience and also Create TV and our Facebook audience. If you have questions for Wanda or Mark or Esther or even myself, we would love for you to type it in the chat, and Tassi will make sure that we get your questions answered. And also say hello if you're watching. Don't be quiet. We know you're out there. So, okay, back to Wanda. So did you experience any form of racism?
So it's interesting that you asked me that, because just the other day, it kind of struck me. I was like, I've always, you know, had Vietnamese aunts and cousins, even though my mom's an only child, but you know how that is. And I just realized, like, I was like, I never got treated differently by the Vietnamese women that I knew or the kids that I knew. But it just really hit me that those women also had mixed Vietnamese kids. And, you know, so how would they treat me any different? And how would the kids treat me any different? We were just kids, you know.
How did the black, sorry,
interestingly enough, I think I was probably in the 4th grade, and my mom came to school for an assembly. And while we were sitting there, all the other little kids were looking around like, whose mama is that? Oh, Wanda has a Chinese mama. And that just really just irked me, because I was like, my mom's not Chinese. She's from Vietnam, you know. And then, of course, well, where is Vietnam? Where is that? And then probably in the 5th or 6th grade, 2 little boys were sitting in the back of the music class behind me, and they had like a little rubber ball and a Matchbox car, and they were just dropping the ball onto the car, singing "We Dropped the Bomb on You" to the tune of the Gap Band song. And I was trying to ignore it, and I just finally just got fed up, and I stood up and I was like, first of all, that's Japan that you're referring to. And again, I'm Vietnamese, you know. So things like that. As I moved on to junior high school and high school, you know, I didn't get picked on, anything like that. I never had any really bad experiences with, say, like the white community. But most of the community that I was around were other military brats. So we just weren't taught that as military brats.
And that's what's important to share is all these different narratives, right? So everyone has different experiences. We're not saying all white people are racist or all so-and-so are so-and-so, right? So I love that you shared a totally different aspect. I'm curious to know, like, what's your favorite food, Vietnamese dish? Like, do you eat stinky stuff? Like, you know, the fermented?
Bánh xèo is my favorite food. And then bún bao Huế. But only how my mom makes it. I don't like it in the restaurant.
No, of course not. What about you, Mark? What is your diet like these days? So I'm curious because Mark is actually married to an African-American woman and raised by a white family, and he's Vietnamese. So I don't know what your favorite food is.
So fortunately living in New York, we have a lot, the opportunity to eat lots of great food. But my wife is also an amazing cook who, you know, I think it's a mix of definitely her traditions growing up in a Black family in St. Louis, and a lot of French food. She loves French food. So there's a lot of French influence in what we eat. And she also is in Russia and has lived in Russia. So there's actually, there's Russian food mixed in there too. And for Vietnamese food, we go out. No one in the family cooks Vietnamese food.
Okay, we'll send you some fish sauce and some recipes to get you started. Right, Wanda? I mean, come on.
Right. Absolutely.
We regularly eat out for Vietnamese food, but we don't cook it at home.
Oh, wow. You're missing out. You know, that motherland calling, going back to source. It's like the fermented fish paste, all that's calling your name right now. That's so interesting. Do you feel like
that was one of the cool things I found about Vietnam is it's such an eating out culture. Everyone eats out all the time. I was like, this is not this like poor impoverished country that I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, because we like my mom didn't really cook until we left Vietnam, because in Vietnam you have people who cook for you. You go out.
Everyone eats out all the time.
And the whole like recycle boxes. Okay, in Vietnam, my grandmother would give me a bowl and she'd be like, go get some pho, right? And then I would like carry this bowl. Yeah, and you bring it back. There's no plasticware. Maybe we'll go back to that with the whole, but now with COVID, it's like all the plastic's okay now, right? Pre-COVID, no plastic. Now it's like everyone's wrapping everything in plastic.
Speaking of your family, Mark, where are your kids right now?
So the older kids went to a Juneteenth protest rally in one of the towns nearby. So yeah, I have 7 kids. So I have one just graduated from college, 2 in college, 1 in high school, 1 in junior high school, and 2 still in elementary school.
Wow. I think Tassi is going to share a photo of your family for us to see. Okay, so why 7 kids? I mean,
lucky number 7.
Yeah.
We have them one at a time. We did adopt one, but the rest.
I hope your wife did it one at a time. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So tell us about their experience as a father. You're watching your kids being of half Vietnamese, half African American. How has that experience been for you as a father watching?
Yeah, I think obviously, my wife brings a lot of Black heritage to her parenting. I think in some ways, when I became a father, because I didn't really feel like I had my Vietnamese ethnic identity down or brought that to the table. Like I felt like I didn't have much to contribute there, but I've tried in my small ways to make sure that kind of they understand, that side of them too. And I think we give them a lot of space to explore their own identities. And I think, just because of the way the United States is too, I definitely, there's definitely recognition. I would say, our children look different too. Some look more Black and some look more Asian. And that also changes, how they experience the world and how the world, perceives them. And I would say that our children, I think, like ourselves as parents, definitely have a very, very diverse mixed set of friends. And I think that's something that, we find enriching, to ourselves and to our children.
Have they experienced any type of racism from anyone? Any of them?
Definitely in different ways. I think, we actually moved out of the city and moved to a suburb of New Jersey, which is predominantly white. And obviously there are pros and cons of that. But I think, I recently read Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I reread Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And one of the things on reading those again in these days, both of them, I think, went to predominantly white high schools and did not thrive in those environments. And they really didn't start academically thriving until they went to their HBCUs, respectively. So I definitely think, like, they're, my two older boys, who I would say, like, on appearance and the world perceives them as Black men, they have a different experience than, my daughters, who are, lighter skinned and, seem more, mixed. And I think for all of them, they, in their college experiences, they get to join, different groups and be part of different groups. I think they've felt, I think they're experimenting a lot in terms of their friend groups and, being part of Black groups and being part of Asian groups and, seeing where they feel comfortable and where, where they feel resonance. But it's very individual. And I think, we as parents, certainly, are close to them and support them, but recognize that each one has their own journey as well.
Wanda, have you been back to Vietnam, or do you have plans to go back?
I have not been back to Vietnam. I brought it up to my mom several times, and she just is not ready to go back yet, especially in today's climate, as far as the United States, going over there and maybe not being able to come back, because you just never know. But I do plan to go back. One of my brothers and I hope to go one day.
When you go, Mark, next year, or were you going to take your entire family or just you?
There will probably be some of us, maybe not all of us. We'll figure that out.
Yeah. My first time back in Vietnam was in 2013. And I have to say, as soon as I landed, I felt like I belonged. And that was something that even to this day, I don't ever feel quite like I belong, whether I'm with the American community or with the Vietnamese community for that matter. I just don't feel like I belong. Do you have that sense, or because you didn't have memory of Vietnam, so you don't have those issues? So maybe it's my own personal issue. I need therapy.
No, and yes, I don't have any memory of Vietnam, but I definitely felt like it was a really wonderful feeling being there, where, there are obviously, a whole country of people who kind of looked like me, and, there was some connection, that was on a deeper level. And I know, when I went then, there was one other, Vietnamese guy who went with me, and he felt the same. And, he had grown up in a Vietnamese family. And it is interesting kind of where we are in terms of Vietnamese diaspora, in terms of literature, because, you now have like Ocean Vuong's memoir and Phuc Tran's memoir. And I read all those because I found those interesting too, because obviously, while I had a refugee experience, it was very different than refugee experiences from different people. And, pertaining to this discussion, Ocean Vuong's mother was biracial. And then, he recently, announced on Instagram that he finally connected and found out who his birth grandfather was, because his mother never knew who that was. But he did the DNA test and figured it out. And then, Phuc Tran grew up with, a Vietnamese family, but he very much felt like he was culturally American and his parents were culturally Vietnamese, and he felt like he didn't fit in his own family. So that memoir was really interesting too.
What about you, Wanda? Do you feel like you belong and that's not an issue?
No, I'm just like you. I kind of feel like one foot here and one foot there, even though I haven't, been back and I have no, memories, but same.
I wonder how we resolve that. Will we ever be able to resolve it? Or maybe everyone feels this way, no matter what, maybe everyone just feels that way anyways. What about you, Esther? Do you feel like you belong? We're going to do a little, survey right here.
Well, here's the thing. All three of you were born in Vietnam. And then I know, Trauma, your story involves moving to several different countries. Each of you have that history of moving around a lot. So as someone who is ethnically Chinese, but was always living here, it's easy for me to just live in this subset of Asian American culture, which is totally a thing. Of course, I don't need to stay there. But what I wonder for people like you guys who have moved a lot in their lives, how do you resolve that sense of what if I had stayed in the country I was born in? Especially, Mark, the title of your photography book was A Story of a Life Not Lived. I felt that was, it sits a little heavy with me because how can you help but wonder,
Yeah, I wonder all the time because I'd be like, having somebody cook and clean for me, have a driver, not this, I'm especially with the shutdown, cooking every day, doing the dishes. Come on. I don't, but joking aside, yeah, I wonder all the time. So we have a few audience comments. So one is for Mark. Thomas Cundiff said, Mark, thank you for adopting. I was adopted into a white family. I always say there's a special place for my parents and you. So that's really beautiful. And then J.H. Spencer wants to know, Wanda, if there's a Vietnamese community in Alabama.
So when we first moved here in 73, going into 74, there were more. There probably are more than I think now, but it seems like there's less here because Hyundai is based here in Montgomery. We have a huge Korean population, though. If there are more Vietnamese than the ones that I know, I don't know, about them.
Interesting. Yeah. Alabama. So I grew up in Utah, and when it started, there was a little Vietnamese community. There's a, grocery store, and we knew them. And there's one or two restaurants. We knew them. But now there's a huge Vietnamese community there.
In Utah?
Yes.
Wow.
My parents are still there. My older brother and his family. Yeah, they my mom doesn't speak English. She doesn't need to. So yeah, there's a large Vietnamese population there. I mean, it goes with during the time when everyone evacuated from Vietnam. So the Mormon church actually opened their doors to many Vietnamese families. So they came there and converted. No, I did not convert, FYI. Not that there's anything wrong with that. into Mormonism. Anyway, so Thomas Cundiff is following up with you, Mark. He said he moved from Pennsylvania to Santa Cruz, and that he still feels like he doesn't quite belong either, even though he grew up in America. So our audience is agreeing with us that there's this odd feeling. I think that we would like for you, maybe we'll start with Wanda, maybe to share with us one word about how you feel about the situation today. How do you feel about the state of the world?
As far as Black Lives Matter or COVID-19?
Anything you want. It's free for all.
COVID-19, wear a mask, please. Stay away from people as much as possible. Stay safe, stay well. As far as Black Lives Matter, it needs to happen. And I'm actually really proud of the younger generation now. I was so afraid when the protests started that it would be like many other protests in the past, say 10 years, where it lasts a day or a week. But I mean, people are really sticking to it. And I have to always remind people, this is the birthplace of the civil rights movement here in Montgomery. And for the Montgomery Bus Boycott, it was 381 days. People don't realize, they think it was just 1 week people weren't riding the bus. It was over a year that people weren't riding the bus, but it got changed. Yeah. And, for these young activists now, they have to stick to their guns. They have to keep at it, keep protesting, keep, making sure that people vote for everyone's best interest. In order to get change done.
Because you're retired? Right. Only young people should keep going. Mark, Wanda, and Trami are retired.
Tired.
And tired. No, I hear you. There's definitely it keeps, here in San Jose, we protest every day. You don't hear about it a lot because you don't see the violence, right? Because that's what media does. Picks up on the violence. Oh, yeah. But the calm, peaceful protests, they don't pick it up. It's happening every day. And I'm very proud of them for being out there. Yeah. But even though what you shared was not one word, but we'll take it. We'll take anything.
Oh, sorry.
At this point. I think Esther has a question for you, Wanda.
Yeah, well, I had two questions. Somebody asked if you speak Vietnamese.
No, not anymore. I lost it when I got ready to start school. So no.
Completely.
I know how to order food, and I know a couple of phrases.
And so then your mom just speaks English really well then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool.
My second question is actually for Wanda and Mark, even though we're still in the middle of this sharing thing. I hear this phrase, the revolution will be Instagrammed, because that's how people are exchanging information about protests, what to do. And Wanda, you had a lot of experience as an activist when you were in high school and the young people then. I'm just curious how you feel that's changed. How has technology helped us, made things harder in certain ways?
I think it's actually helped a lot. I see a lot of people posting on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I mean, it's really helping big time to get the real images out there, not just the media images, and to get the information out there to people so that they can join in, the movement as well.
Yeah. We have a comment from our Facebook friend, Luan Nguyen. She says she's a naturalized U.S. citizen from Vietnam. And she said, I went to Vietnam 2 times. I felt like I belonged and not belonged in both countries. Hear, hear.
Yeah.
She's my friend too.
She's our friend. Yeah. Yeah, totally true.
One thing that also I want to get your opinions on is, now because of social media, there can also be such a thing as performative allyship, where people will post, things they'll pass around petitions to sign. But the question is, do you live out being anti-racist in our real lives? And with social media, like, we don't really get to know. Just curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll share while everyone else is thinking. So like I'm not someone who would go down and protest, right? I'm not a rah-rah person, but I do it in my own way, and I'm not someone who even shares what I do. So for example, I was invited to be on this panel to share, to talk about how can foundations be more equitable and whatnot. So it's in those platforms that I share my perspective and my views and offer solutions for them to move forward. So that's another important thing about being an advocate and also activist, or whatever it is you want to call it, is to provide solutions, not just complaints, right? Because sometimes people don't know the answer. Give some solution. And I think that's really important. So that's how I do my work. So it's not just through, me sharing things and arguing with people on Facebook, which I do, by the way. And then I have to like go into my Zen mode because it's too much. So what about you, Wanda or Mark?
I'll let Mark take this one.
Yeah, I think, for me, even, within my own family, like, while, I'm shocked and upset by things like, George Floyd and the killing in Atlanta, and, we could go on and on. But it doesn't, the truth is, it doesn't affect me as deeply as it does my wife as a Black woman. And to see her visceral pain, to, as a father, knowing what the obstacles my children face, and my boys who, again, by appearance look more Black, what my fears for them as they, are in the world, and the dangers that they face within the broader white community, or within, with the kind of like military police complex. It's really scary. But I would say like a couple of things. One is it's really important for me to obviously empathize with those in my family and the broader community. Two, it's important for me to constantly educate myself to improve and better myself. And I think it's really, really important for to allow, the Black people in our country to be the leaders of this movement. I know, certainly there are people of many races, could and should be allies, but I think it's really, really important that the Black voices are the voices in leadership positions.
And then to piggyback off of that, and to answer your question, Esther, I think there are a lot of what I call fake activists. So they're doing it for social media clout, and probably don't do it in their real lives. But on the other hand, there are a lot of actual activists and people that actually practice, in their everyday life, what they're doing for the movement.
So we're going to send Esther off to prepare for her beautiful song that she'll be playing and sing for us. And while she does that, we do have another Facebook question for you, our guest. And so Joanne Ho from Facebook says, what advice would you give to young people who are trying to deal with call-out culture? Some are quite traumatized. I'm not sure what call-out culture means.
Yeah, can you define call-out culture?
Can you define call-out culture, Joanne? So as she types that in, someone else says you had a good point, Mark, for your last remark. And Loanne Nguyen says, perhaps it's a bigger issue problem that needs to be have all kinds of solutions and actions. Yeah. I think
But
Joanne's typing.
I would.
So Joanne says it's attacking people regarding past behaviors. So what advice would you give to young people who are trying to deal with call out culture, which means attacking people regarding past behavior? So like I used to say certain things that sounded racist as well. And so now I've learned, I have adjusted, I have recognized my mistakes and trying not to do that anymore. But those who knew me or have seen my words or heard me from the past might be calling me out now. Oh, well, Tommy, you're a racist because you used to do this and that. I think that's what she's referring to. So what advice do you have for people like that or myself?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I'm not sure if I have a deeply thought out answer, but I think, one thing which was brought up in the White Fragility book, which I think was very helpful for me to understand kind of the place of white people in this institutionalized racism system that we have in the United States. But I think, for whatever strange reasons, and I would say, it's part of maintaining the racial hierarchy in the United States. We're somehow told not to talk about race, and it's because I have black friends, or I have there's some excuse that says I'm not a racist. But I think it's what she points out that's really, really important is that, there's this good bad dichotomy. There's bad people who are racist and I'm good, so I'm not a racist. And there's a whole spectrum of behaviors, attitudes, and there's a lifelong learning process. And I think an analogy that she uses, which is, really helpful, is, I'm a heterosexual man. I'm married to a heterosexual woman. That doesn't make me, I can't tell people, well, I'm married to a woman, I can't be sexist. Like, of course, that sounds ridiculous, right? So to say well, I have a black friend, I can't be racist, that too is ridiculous. So I think there's a lifelong learning process, on these issues. Hopefully we do evolve and change over time. We get better. We improve ourselves. We can, acknowledge, the things that, we did in the past that were wrong, and happy that we're not that person anymore. I think that's part of, maturing and, part of our lives. And, hopefully, we can learn from our own lessons and teach them to others. That's one of the things I really appreciated about Ibram, Kendi in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I would say 50% of that book is him talking about his own racism as a black man and how racist ideas were taught to him in his environment and his process as an adult trying to unlearn those things.
Thank you so much for those perfect words to send us off for today's talk show. I'd like to thank you both and for joining us and tackle a really difficult topic. But also, I love that we are taking different aspects, right? So it's not just sharing one narrative or being accusatory. It's really about a learning experience. And Mark, thank you for sharing your photography, and Wanda for sharing your life, a little tidbit with us. I would love to have some of your mom's recipes, by the way, and then we're going to send them to Mark and make him cook it for his family.
We have to send him the ingredients too.
That's true. So I'd like to thank you both, and we're going to say goodbye as we have Esther play a beautiful song for us. It is called Body, and we're going to copy and paste those lyrics over. And she actually wrote this song during Black Lives Matter, when this whole, movement started recently, and the protests. So we really want to thank our audience, our Twitch audience, our Create TV audience, and Comcast Channel 30 and Facebook for joining us. And that's it. And join us next week on Wednesday. We have another show with artist Hadi Agi. And oh my gosh, he's quite good. So you have to tune in at noon next Wednesday. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you soon.
Do you see his body? Did you know his name? And do you say it gently or scream out with rage? Can you see in color different from your own? Should it take his warning to arouse your soul? Help us love our bodies, and may we use them well. So when we find our voices, they have a story to tell. They'll have a story to tell. Help me love my body. May I use it well. So when my heart finally breaks, it will heal with that. It will heal.